Today's video is a knit and chat about what it's like going from someone who was a monogamous knitter and certainly no longer is. Welcome back to my knitting channel. My name is Nadine and you can find me at yourknittingbestie on Instagram, Ravelry and here on YouTube. On this channel, I chat about what it's like to be a knitter in Brisbane, being one of the warmer climates. Although we are delightfully experiencing some cooler weather right now. Although that hasn't stopped me from just turning on my aircon. So it's not that cold. But I think definitely cooler for what's usual around here. So today I thought we might do a bit of a knit and chat. Just a little catch up, and the topic for today is what it's been like for me going for someone who was a monogamous knitter, meaning for those who haven't heard the term before, that I've knit exclusively on kind of one project, and what it's been like going from a monogamous knitter into someone who has quite a few projects on the go, and what I think the pros and cons of each approach are. So, while we chat, I will be knitting away on a baby blanket. Gosh, what have I done here? Yeah, so this is the baby blanket I'm knitting at the moment. I'm mid-row, so maybe you can't see it stretched out as much, but this is being knit up in Fiddlesticks Superb 8, which is a machine washable acrylic, which I've spoken about a little bit on the channel. And this is a pattern that I kind of just created myself. It's nothing too fancy at all. So what I'm doing is on each row, to have this nice neat border along the edge, I'm slipping the first stitch purlwise with yarn in front, and then I'm doing 4 rows of garter stitch and then 4 rows of knit 1 purl 1 rib. And I'm starting each kind of new section on the wrong side of the work, just so that it looks consistent, because there is a little bit of a difference between the right side and the wrong side. So yes, so this is what the right side looks like. It looks quite neat, I think. And look, the wrong side looks very similar. But you can see on the first row of knit 1 purl 1 rib, it kind of draws in the garter row just below here. So it makes it look a little bit more textured. So I think this side looks a little bit more consistent, but I don't think the recipients will probably notice the difference between the two. So I'm in the middle of my first ribbing row. So let's see how I can go and if I've got any better at multitasking knitting while chatting. And I've got my little row counter here. So this is just one I got from Hobby, or Hobie. I've heard it pronounced both ways. But it's yeah, it's one I got from Hobby. And I think through Hobby they have this terrific system where you get a whole bunch of points each time you order, and then you can use the points to buy things from a specific store. So I think my first order, I suspect I might have even got this for free, and then I was able to use my points to purchase a couple more. So I had 3 of these actually, and I quite like the pink ones. And then I ended up giving one to that friend that I was knitting with so that she's able to keep track as well. Anyway, I quite like them, but whenever I use them, I always get a lot of questions when I use them in public, and people are like, oh gosh, what's that? Anyway, I digress. So I'm kind of nearly towards the end of the first bowl, so I've reached that uncomfortable spot where the bowl kind of loses all integrity and is basically just a mass of knots. So hopefully that doesn't hold me up too much as we chat. Let me just double check this is recording. That has happened to me before. Okay, yes, we're good. Okay, so If you hear any noise in the background, it's because my neighbour has just started doing his lawn, and Michael has volunteered to help me with my lunch prep for this week so that I have time to film. So you might hear him kind of doing some pots and pans in the background. But anyway, so onto the topic of today's video. I started out and have always been for years and years and years and years and years I've been a monogamous knitter, so only one project on the go, and for me that really worked somehow. It just kind of soothed my brain, I think, because in life we always have so many things in the air and on the go at once. So it was a nice break from thinking about different things at once, if that makes sense. Every time I sat down to knit, there was no decision about which project would get some love that evening. It was just kind of, well, this is the one that's on the go, so may as well pick that one up and keep going. So I found that quite good. And one of the other positives, I think, was that, with every project, there kind of comes a point in time where it might not be as fun as other parts of the project. So for example, I'm thinking of, for example, a top-down sweater. I always find it challenging when you get to the point where you've done your collar, you've done your yoke, and you're just hitting the point where you might approach splitting for the arms. So you've got the maximum amount of stitches that you'll have on your needles, and it is just taking forever to get around every single round. That's probably, for me, that's my least favorite part of doing a project. And then you split for the body, split for the sleeves and keep working on the body. And it's just such a, it's a sweet little moment of relief, where you get to have a smaller number of needles on, a smaller number of stitches on your needles. And when you only have one project on the go and you're quite disciplined about saying, well, I have to finish this one before I can start the next one, it helps you, I think, push through those moments where you're kind of like, oh, I don't quite love this bit. So for some people, I think it might be sleeves. Get stuck on sleeve island, similar to the kind of single sock syndrome, where you do one and you're like, oh gosh, we have to go off and do this whole thing again. Isn't this funny? I adore knitting, but there's these little points where you're kind of like, if I had my choice, maybe I would wander off and start a different project. But for me, that's not what I have done in most of my knitting career. But when I was thinking of starting this channel, it kind of occurred to me that it would be a pretty dull channel if all I was doing was knitting on one project, which would probably take me a couple months, to be honest, because I'm not the world's speediest knitter, as you can probably see now. I'm not the world's speediest knitter. What I love most about knitting is kind of chilling out at the end of the day where you've been rushing around and taking your time, because the joy is in each stitch, for me at least. That's how I see it. And that's probably because I'm a bit of a process knitter, so I get a lot of joy out of the process of knitting rather than kind of the outcome of having knitted goods. I saw it put well once online by someone else who said, I don't knit because I need another pair of socks. I knit because I like knitting. And yeah, for me that's kind of something that rings true, although of course I do love having knitted goods in my wardrobe as well. But anyway, so I figured probably not the most exciting content if me talking about my projects is me talking about the same sweater for months at a time. Although I did figure that I could kind of spice it up a little bit by having topical videos in between, or knit and chats like this sort of video. But so that's why I decided to have a go at having a couple projects on the go at once. And it kind of happened organically because just before I started this channel, which was at the start of this year, I think, so at the end of last year, I was coming up to my sister's wedding and I was knitting her a cardigan for her wedding. And at the same time, the West Knits knit along was happening, kicking off in October. And I was so excited to participate in that knit along. But I also had a deadline for my sister's cardigan because she got married in November, I believe. So I kind of, as a matter of necessity, had to start multitasking my projects. So I had started the shawl, and then I pretty much had to put it down, which wasn't too bad actually, because I was in a bit of a quandary with what to do with that whole thing. Anyway, so I didn't mind a little bit of a break there. And I had to kind of work exclusively on my sister's cardigan to get it done in time. So that was my first introduction to having multiple projects on the go. And it's interesting to reflect on that because I got the cardigan done because I meet deadlines. But the shawl remains undone as of this video. There is still quite a significant amount to do because after I finished my sister's cardigan, I immediately cast on something else that then took my attention, and the shawl kind of languished and continues to languish, although I'll pick it up from time to time. So I think things kind of devolved rapidly because as soon as I got kind of the high of casting on a new project a little bit whenever I wanted to, instead of waiting to finish the project beforehand, it would kind of get to the point where if I hit one of those kind of points in a project where I was just like not 100% loving it, then I would just cast on something new. And I have now realized how rapidly that can kind of spin out of control, because at the moment I have this baby blanket which has to be done reasonably quickly because the baby's due in July and could, conceivably come a little bit early. So that is this is my immediate project. This has to be done. But I have this project. I've got the shawl knit along that's still plugging along. I've got my engagement socks. I'm still on the cuff of the second sock. First sock's all done, just on the second sock. And the second sock is a little bit less fun than the first one. So I haven't picked it up because I've had other things to work on. And then out of nowhere, with absolutely kind of no provocation from anyone, I decided to cast on a hat for my brother-in-law, because with the cooler weather and with him being a fan of the Deanie Beanie, I was like, well, I have to make him this season's hat. Which he found funny because he was like, well, I thought the benefit of wearing your hats, Nadine, was that it was kind of a slow fashion, not getting a new one all the time. And here I am making him one like every year anyway. Anyway, so I've spun completely out of control, and as a result, I've found that, yeah, I've kind of lost my motivation to pick up any of my projects because there's kind of the moment of indecision, I guess, when you decide to sit down and you have to think about which project you're going to pick up. And with, there's been, a bit of life happening in the background, which takes up some time and decision-making capability as well. So I go to pick up my knitting, and just the little friction point of being like, oh, what will I work on tonight, seems to be enough to almost put me off picking up my knitting. Which sounds crazy when you think about it like that, but I mean, knitting isn't mandatory. It's not a mandatory part of my life. It's just something I do when I enjoy it, to unwind a little bit. So I don't really feel obligated to pick it up when when I'm not feeling it. And I was reflecting on that, and I think that's a little bit because of this different approach I've taken of just casting on different projects. Because even though I have all of these things on the go, I am considering casting on something else. See, I can't be stopped. This is unheard of. If you were to talk to me like 2 years ago, I would have been like, two projects at once. Whoa. And here I am being like, I could add a fourth, maybe a fifth, just to keep things interesting. So I think for me, one of the downsides of non-monogamous knitting is that kind of difficulty in choosing which one you progress at which time. And for me, losing a little bit of knitting mojo, possibly as a result of that different process. But one of the good things about being a non monogamous knitter now is that I think you can definitely have, maybe if you have two projects on the go, I think that is quite a nice, happy place, happy medium, because you could have, for example, one slightly more complicated project. So if it's a pullover with a bit of, something going on with some color work or some lace or something, that might be something that you do when you sit down and you want to concentrate and do something a little bit challenging. And then you could have a little vanilla project on the side, which you work on when you're socializing or when you're watching TV or something like that, or when you're just exhausted, to be honest, and don't want to, commit as much brain power to your knitting. So I think that's one of the upsides of non monogamous knitting, the fact that you can switch projects to suit the situation. Because when I was a monogamous knitter, I definitely found that, for example, if I was on a difficult project, like I remember doing my ranunculus, and when I was doing my ranunculus, that was definitely a sit down with my iPad in front of me so that I could look up the tutorials for each different stitch. Um, and it was certainly not something that I could do if we were in the car driving up to the coast or something like that. So I found myself sitting in the car with Michael driving, and usually I would be knitting my little heart out, but I couldn't for the life of me maintain conversation and figure out all of those intricate stitches on the yoke. So I was just sitting there with idle hands, which Michael jokes all the time is like my least favorite thing in the world. Just sitting there doing nothing with my hands, just like, I have nothing, I have no knitting. So that's one thing I've definitely enjoyed and something I might keep going. I did see a post on one of my many Facebook groups that I'm part of for knitting, and they had suggested some different ways that you might convince yourself to go and pick up your whips before casting on something new. So there was someone who sounded like they were quite a disciplined monogamous knitter, so very much a finish this project, gift it if that's what you're going to do, or decide what's happening to it. And once you've done that, you can move on. And the pro of that approach, and one of the things that I also really liked when I was a monogamous knitter, is how easy it is to plan your next project. Because if say this was my only project, I know approximately how long I'm going to make it, or at the very least, I know how many balls of yarn I have, so I can pretty much tell when I'm getting towards the end of the project. And if I'm just doing this one and then I'll move on to the next project, I can kind of get to a point and be like, okay, now is time to plan my next project so that I don't have that awful feeling of being in between projects when you're kind of deciding what your next one will be, but you have nothing in your hands. Terrible. So that is one thing I really liked about it. And that's much more difficult when you have a bunch of projects on the go, all in different states of doneness. So you're just kind of like, well, I don't really know when to order new yarn or if I should plan a new project because I don't know how long it's going to take me to finish all of these other ones. For me, it kind of adds a complication to that side of things as well. But anyway, so that was one approach. There was another lady who said that she kind of alternates. So she'll cast on one project, work on that project, but then before she starts another one, she has to have finished something out of her whip cupboard. And that made me feel a little bit better actually reading that because I was like, okay, at least I don't have a whip cupboard so far. They're just, I actually don't think I'm that far off having a whip cupboard. But at the moment, they're just in a pile next to my couch, which is where I knit. So if I took that approach, perhaps I would be able to get down into a reasonable amount of whips in not too long. So I liked that approach. And then I guess some people just are okay with having a whole bunch of things on the fly. And probably, if that's you, I think your brain might work in a different way to mine, and I'm quite envious of your ability to kind of go with the flow and just pick up what brings you joy and not get stuck like I seem to on making the decision of what to knit that day or that night. So yeah, they're my kind of reflections on the differences that I've found between going from being a solely monogamous knitter to someone with a fair few things on the go. I think for me, to move forward, I've been trying to figure out how I'm going to get myself moving again. And I think this baby blanket has got to be my priority, as I mentioned. So I'm just going to knit away as I can to finish this project. And then I think I'm going to take a long, hard look at my whips and decide which ones will live on and which, if any, will kind of go to the wayside. And maybe I'll take that approach of kind of finishing one whip and then casting on something new and then finishing one whip. So almost like a midway point between the monogamous and non-monogamous, wow, I messed up those words, monogamous and non-monogamous knitting approaches. So you kind of start one project and just stick with that one. So don't get distracted or don't get entranced by your other projects, and then finish that one and then pick up a whip and then exclusively work on that one. So almost kind of getting a little bit back towards more of a monogamous knitter. I think that's what's going to work for me. And then I think if I keep it to just a reasonable number of whips, because I think it still is the case that it probably is boring to just hear about one project when I do my project updates. But I think if I keep it to maybe 3, so if I have a sock, for example, because I really want to keep going with socks. So if I have one sock project, which is perfect to go in your bag, so that can be my little travel project. And then I really want to have one garment going because I just adore knitting garments. That's what kind of really motivates me in my knitting and what I get most joy out of both making and wearing. And then maybe the third one can be whatever gift I have on the go. Because I think at the moment, with the exception of my shawl, I'm knitting all gifts otherwise. So maybe I can do a split like that, and that can help me get my head back around my projects and help me find some more inspiration. But you know, I'm not too fussed about the ups and downs that come with my knitting velocity or my knitting mojo, as I've seen other people put it. because that's a little bit just life, isn't it? We've got a fair bit happening. You know, my job tends to be busy, as I'm sure yours are as well. So it comes in waves, and at the moment it's waving. So I don't have as much spare time. And we're also doing some renovations around our house. So we've booked in a bit of a bathroom refresh, which we're super excited about. But we have to figure out colours and tiles and things like that. And I'm finding it all a little bit much to get my head around, because usually I'm pretty happy with making colour selections. It doesn't bother me too much, but that's for things like picking out yarn, where I'm happy to make some kind of wild choices like this one. But that's because the worst thing that comes out of it at the end is that you're maybe you don't wear something as much. The stakes are very low. Whereas if you pick a tile that you don't like, you have to look at it every day, probably multiple times a day. And I really want to try and avoid that. So there's a lot of thinking going into the colours and what sort of vanity we might get and what we're going to get the most practical use out of in terms of layout. So that's happening. I also had some travel through work recently. Usually it's down to Sydney or Melbourne, but this time it was actually just to the Gold Coast, which was nice. So about a week or so of travel since we've last spoke. And I actually was able to duck down to the beach super quickly before my day started on one of the days with one of my friends, and we were only there for a couple minutes and we saw some dolphins popping out of the waves super close to shore actually. So that was a fantastic start to the day. But anyway, yeah, so there's just been a little bit happening in my personal life as well, which means sometimes you just don't have the opportunity to pick up your knitting. And, you know, even if you do have the chance when you're that busy, sometimes you just want to sit down and watch the TV without anything in your hands. Although I have to say that's something of a rare occurrence for me. If I can sit down, I'm usually knitting. But anyway, I'd love to hear your observations on if you've had a similar journey to me, if you kind of switched from one project to multiple projects to way too many projects, back to a more limited number of projects, or if you've always been exclusively monogamous or always been someone who can manage a whole bunch of projects at once, and any kind of strategies you have on managing your various different projects. I would be all ears. I would love to hear it. So, how have I been going? I think I'm on my third row of ribbing, so that's actually a bit of an increase from my first knit and chat where I really didn't get too much done at all. So hopefully I can find some time this evening. It's Sunday Arvo. Afternoon, sorry. Sunday Arvo. So hopefully this evening I can sit down and get some more good work in on this baby blanket so that it is ready. Sorry, my laptop just locked me out. That's interesting. Anyway, I've just finished a row, so let me show you the kind of better stretched out dimensions of this. Oh, and gosh, I hope the sound of my metal knitting needles hasn't been too distracting for some of you. I know it took Michael a little while to get used to it when I switched to metal needles. So I hope that's okay. I know one of you in particular doesn't like the sound of metal needles, so apologies if you can hear it. I'll see if I can edit it out. Anyway, so this is the baby blanket so far. I originally cast on way too many stitches. I don't know how that happened because I did the math on, you know, I did a little gauge square and calculated out how many stitches I should need to get to a certain dimension, and it was way too big when I ended up doing a couple rows. So I ended up starting again with much fewer stitches. Anyway, so I like this size now. I think I'll eventually go for a rectangular shape. And you can see kind of at the side and at the bottom, I aimed for the same sort of approximate amount of garter vertically and horizontally to give it some sort of symmetry. I think I got a little bit tired of doing the garter stitch at the bottom and switched to the ribbing a little early, but oh well, that's okay. So yeah, I think it's coming along nicely. And part of my plan is to take the swatch that I did in pattern for this, with this yarn, and run it through the washing machine and the dryer a couple times, probably, just each time we do some wash, maybe for the next couple weeks, in an attempt to destroy it basically by washing machine, so that I can be confident or less confident when I tell the new parents that they can feel free to machine wash it. It might end up just being machine wash and lie flat to dry. That seems like the recommended approach. But if it goes in the dryer, hopefully it will survive at least once. So I can tell them if it accidentally goes in, that's okay, but try to avoid it probably. That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, yeah. So that's me done, and I'm off to the couch after this, after I make some food for my dinners for this week. That's one of the things I do to try and manage my time, because Michael and I both tend to work late through the week. So we prepare our food in advance so that it's ready for us when we get home or when we need to eat at lunchtime, in an attempt to eat vegetables and not eat too much takeout, so that we can instead spend all our money on renovations and yarn. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining me again. I hope you enjoyed my second ever knit and chat. Your company is always appreciated. I saw one of your comments saying that I can regard these more casual chats as a bit of a chat with my grandma, and I love that idea because I love chatting with my grandma. She's fantastic, as are many of you based on your comments. So thank you very much for your company. And if you liked the video, it would be wonderful if you would hit the thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it would be terrific if you would consider subscribing so that we can hang out some more in the future. Okay, thanks guys. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.